They say in the old villages of Zamara, where the baobab trees still whisper secrets to the wind, that the heart of a princess is like a wild river. You cannot tell it where to flow. You can only watch and pray it does not drown you. This is the story of Princess Adaise, the only daughter of King Obina and the silent bodyguard who was paid to guard her body but forgot to guard his own heart. Listen well, my people. In the modern kingdom of Zamara, where glass towers stood beside ancient palaces and black Rolls Royces rode past women selling roasted corn by the roadside, there lived a princess who was the talk of every market, every newspaper, and every whispering tongue. Her name was Adaeze, which means daughter of a king, and she wore that name like a crown of fire. At 23, Princess Adaeze was everything a royal daughter should not be. She drove fast cars through the city at midnight. She danced in nightclubs where the music shook the walls. She laughed too loudly, spent too freely, and loved too quickly. The people of Zamara adored her, feared her, and gossiped about her all in the same breath. That girl will finish her father before her time, the old women said, shaking their heads as they pounded yam in wooden mortars. King Obina was a patient man, but even rivers have their banks. One rainy evening, after Addis crashed her third sports car in 6 months and was photographed kissing a foreign musician at a beach party, the king called her into his chamber. Addis, he said, his voice heavy like thunder, behind distant hills, I have lost 6 bodyguards to your stubbornness this year. 6 good men who could not keep up with your wildness, but I have found a 7th, and this one is different. Adaise rolled her eyes and folded her arms. Father, I do not need another shadow following me everywhere. I am not a child. No, the king said softly. You are worse. You are a princess who was forgotten she is one. From tomorrow, Captain Eze will be your new guard. You will not chase him away. You will not charm him into forgetting his duty, and you will not, under any sky, sleep with him like you did the last one. Adaise's cheeks burned. Father, tomorrow, my daughter, tomorrow. The next morning, Captain Eze arrived at the palace before the sun had finished stretching his arms across the sky. He was tall, taller than any guard Adaise had ever seen. His shoulders were broad like the trunk of an Iroko tree, and his skin was the deep brown of rich earth after rain. He wore a plain black suit, and his eyes were the kind of eyes that had seen things most men only dreamed about in nightmares. But what struck Adaise most was his silence. He did not smile. He did not bow too deeply. He did not let his eyes wander over her body the way the other gods had done. He simply stood there, as still as a mountain, and waited. Adaise, who had been preparing to make his life miserable from the very first moment, felt something she did not expect. Curiosity. So, she said, walking slowly around him like a lioness, studying new prey. You are the famous Captain Eze. Tell me, Captain, are you married? No, Your Highness. Girlfriend? No, Your Highness. Then you must be very lonely. No, Your Highness. She stopped in front of him, close enough to smell the faint scent of soap and something like rain on his skin. She tilted her head and smiled the smile that had made princes forget their kingdoms. Captain, do you find me beautiful? For the first time, his eyes met hers. And what she saw there was not desire. It was not even admiration. It was something colder and more dangerous. It was respect, wrapped tightly around duty, with no space for anything else. Your Highness, he said calmly, I was not hired to answer that question. I was hired to keep you alive. And with those words, Princess Adaise felt something crack inside her chest. Not pain, not anger, something she could not yet name. Part 3. The games begin. In the weeks that followed, Adaise declared a private war against Captain Eze. She wore dresses that would make a holy man forget his prayers. He did not blink. She laughed too close to his ear at palace dinners. He did not move. She pretended to sleep coming out of the swimming pool, hoping he would catch her in an embarrassing way. He caught her with the care of a man lifting a fragile vase, set her down, and stepped back without a word. "Why do you not look at me?" she finally demanded one afternoon, as they walked through the palace garden where bright yellow flowers danced in the breeze. "I look at you, Your Highness." "No, you watch me, like a hawk watches a chicken. You do not see me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your Highness, if I saw you the way you want to be seen, I could not guard you the way you need to be guarded. A man who loves cannot think clearly, and a God who cannot think clearly buries the one he was paid to protect." Adaize stopped walking. "So, you admit it. You could love me if you allowed yourself." Eze turned to her, and for one short heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, locked behind iron doors. "I am paid to protect you, Your Highness, not to love you. Please do not confuse the two." She walked away from him that day, with tears she refused to let fall. And that night, for the first time in many years, Princess Adaize did not go out dancing. She sat on her balcony and looked at the stars and wondered why a man's silence could hurt more than another man's insults. The trouble began on a Thursday. Adaize was at a charity event in the city, wearing a red dress and a smile she did not feel, when Captain Eze suddenly gripped her elbow. It was the first time he had touched her without ceremony. "We are leaving. Now." "What? Eze, I have not even—" "Now, Your Highness." His voice left no room for argument. He moved her through the crowd with the quiet speed of a leopard, one hand firm on her back, his eyes scanning every face, every shadow. Outside, he did not lead her to the royal car. Instead, he pushed her into a plain grey vehicle she had never seen before and drove into the night. "Eze, what is happening? Talk to me." "Someone has placed a price on your head, Your Highness. A large one. The king received the information an hour ago. There is a man at that event tonight who was paid to take you." Adaize's heart forgot how to beat for a moment. "Take me where?" "Somewhere you would never come back from." The world, which had always been a playground for the princess, suddenly became a very small and frightening place. "Where are we going?" "A safe place. No phones, no servants, no one who knows us. Just until your father handles the threat." "For how long?" Eze's jaw tightened. "As long as it takes." The safe place was a small house made of red clay and tin, hidden deep in a village where the river sang lullabies at night and the frogs answered back. There was no electricity, there was no television, there was only one bedroom, one small kitchen, and a wooden bench outside where an old man might have once smoked his pipe and watched the sunset. Princess Adaize, who had slept in palaces and five-star hotels her whole life, stood in the middle of the dusty sitting room and almost wept. "I cannot live here." "You will live here," Eze said, setting down their small bags. "Because the other choice is dying somewhere nicer." He gave her the bedroom, he took the bench. The first night she could not sleep. The mosquitoes sang in her ears, the darkness pressed against the windows like a living thing. She kept remembering the way Eze had rushed her out of the party, the hard look in his eyes, the way his hand had trembled for half a second when he closed the car door. Half a second. She was almost sure she had imagined it. Almost. In the village, there was no princess and no captain. There was only a man and a woman pretending to be husband and wife, so the villagers would not ask questions. "Good morning, madam," the women called, as Adaize walked to the river to fetch water, her fine hands blistering on the clay pot. "Good morning," she would answer, remembering at the last second to smile like a village wife. Eze taught her things she had never bothered to learn. How to light a fire with dry grass, how to cook rice over stones, how to wash clothes in the river by beating them against flat rocks. At first, she hated every moment. Then, slowly, she began to notice something strange. She had never laughed this much in her life. One evening, she burned the soup so badly that the smoke chased them both out of the house. She expected Eze to be angry. Instead, he stood outside, looked at her flower-covered face and tear-filled eyes, and did something she had never seen him do. He laughed. It was a deep, warm laugh, like drums in the distance. It transformed his whole face. For that one moment, the stone mountain became a man, and Adais, watching him, felt her heart slip quietly out of her chest and into his hands without his permission. Is, she whispered, you should laugh more often. The laughter faded from his face, but something softer remained. There has not been much to laugh about in my life, Your Highness. Here I am not Your Highness. Here I am just Ada. He looked at her for a long moment. The sun was setting behind her, painting her skin in gold and honey. Then he said, very quietly, Ada. And the way he said her name, my child, was like a prayer said by a man who had forgotten he still knew how to pray. Days became weeks. The village became familiar, and the wall between the princess and her guard began to crack like dry earth waiting for rain. She learned the story in small pieces, like picking grains of rice from sand. His mother had been a market woman who sold pepper. His father had died in a fire when Eze was 9. He had joined the army to escape hunger and stayed because discipline was the only mother that never left him. He had buried friends, he had killed men, he had never allowed himself to want anything that could be taken away. Is that why you do not love anyone? She asked one night, as they sat outside under a sky full of stars, so bright they looked like spilled salt. I love, he said. I love my country. I love my duty. I love my mother's memory. Those are safe things to love. Yes, they are safe. And me? The words left her mouth before she could catch them. Am I safe to love? The silence stretched so long, she thought he would not answer. Then he said, you are the most dangerous thing I have ever been asked to protect, Ada. Not because of the men who want to kill you, because of what you are doing to me without even trying. Her breath caught. I am paid to protect you, not to love you. You keep saying those words like they are a wall, but walls can fall easy. He stood up abruptly. Go to sleep, Ada, please. And he walked away into the darkness, leaving her alone with the heart that would not stop pounding. The night the wall fell. It happened during a storm. The rain came down like the sky had broken open. The wind screamed through the cracks in the walls, and the old roof rattled as if it might fly away. Adès, who had never been afraid of storms in the palace where everything was strong and safe, found herself shaking under her thin blanket. She called his name. Eze. He was beside her in a heartbeat, his body a wall between her and her fear. I am here. I am here. Do not leave me tonight. Please, I cannot. The thunder. He hesitated. Every soldier in him screamed at him to step away, to remember his duty, to remember the line. But the man in him, the man who had laughed at burnt soup and whispered her name like a prayer, that man could not move. He sat beside her on the bed. She put her head against his chest and listened to his heart beating fast, faster, like a drum calling him to a battle he was losing. Ada, he whispered, we cannot. I know. If anything happens to you because my mind was on loving you instead of guarding you, I know, Eze. Then why? She lifted her face and looked at him, and in her eyes he saw everything she had never told him, the lonely nights in the palace, the men who only wanted her body or her father's name, the little girl who had grown up surrounded by people and still felt invisible, and behind all of that, a love so new and so true it had not yet learned how to speak in full sentences. Because, she said, you are the first persons who ever looked at me like I was more than a princess, even when you were pretending not to look at all. He closed his eyes, and for one single, trembling moment, he allowed himself to rest his forehead against hers. Not a kiss, something deeper than a kiss, a surrender. If we live through this, he whispered, I will tell you everything I have locked away. Every word, every feeling. I swear it on my mother's grave. And if we do not, then I would die knowing I loved the princess who, for a little while, let me call her Ada. She cried then, not the tears of a spoiled girl who could not get her way, the tears of a woman who had finally found something worth being afraid of losing. the hunters arrive. They came 3 nights later. Eze heard them before Adaise did. The soft snap of a branch, the wrong kind of silence from the frogs. He was already on his feet, pulling her out of bed, pressing a finger to her lips. They found us. Do exactly what I say. He pushed her out of the back window and into the tall grass. Then he turned to face the darkness, with nothing but the weapon at his waist and a promise in his heart. What happened in that little house by the river? No one can say exactly. The villagers heard gunshots, they heard shouting, they heard one long silence that felt like the world had stopped breathing. When the royal soldiers arrived at dawn, following the tracking signal Eze had been quietly sending to the king all along, they found 3 strangers dead on the ground. They found the house broken and bleeding, and they found Captain Eze on his knees in the doorway, one arm wrapped around the shaking princess, the other pressed against a wound in his side that would not stop flowing. "She is safe," he told the commander. "She is safe. That is all that matters." And then his eyes rolled back, and he fell. What's the old women say? Captain Eze did not die that night, but he came so close that Adaise sat beside his hospital bed for 4 days without sleeping, holding his hand and whispering every word she had never been brave enough to say. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was her. Tired, tear-streaked, still the most beautiful face he had ever seen. "Ada," he whispered, "you are not allowed to leave me, Eze. You hear me? You are not allowed." He tried to smile. "I was paid to protect you, not to love you." She laughed through her tears. "Then I will pay you myself for the rest of your life with every heartbeat I have." The king came to see him that evening. King Obinna was a proud man, and proud men do not easily bend. But he looked at his daughter, who had stopped running wild and had started looking at the world with soft, quiet eyes. He looked at the broken captain, who had spilled his blood to keep her alive, and the king did something kings rarely do. He sat down beside the common soldier's bed and said, "Captain Eze, you were hired to protect my daughter. You have done more than that. You have given her back to me as a woman instead of a wild child. Whatever you ask of me now, I will give." Eze looked at Adaise. Then he looked at the king. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "I have never asked for anything in my life, but if you will allow it, I would like to ask for her heart, with your blessing." The king was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Our heart, Captain, has already chosen you. Our Father only blesses what is already true. And so, my child, that is the story of Princess Adaise and Captain Eze. They married under the baobab tree in the village where they had Eden, with the river singing their song and the frogs answering back. The princess, who had once crushed cars and broken hearts, became a woman who built schools for village girls. The captain, who had never allowed himself to love, became a man who laughed every day, because his wife burned soup on purpose now, just to hear him laugh. But listen well to the lesson, for every story of Zamara carries one. The old women say that love is like a thief in the night. It does not knock, it does not ask permission. It climbs through the window when you are busy guarding the door. And the stronger the wall you build around your heart, the louder it falls when love finally comes for you. They also say this: a man paid to protect a woman's body will do his job if he is honest. But a man who learns to protect her spirit, her laughter, her quiet tears in the night, that man was never truly paid at all. That man was cold. And some callings, my child, are louder than any duty, louder even than fear, louder even than death. Now go. The fire is dying and the night grows cold. But remember the story. Tell it to your own children one day, and tell them that in the kingdom of Zamara there once lived a princess who learned that the greatest treasures are not found in palaces. They are found in the eyes of a quiet man who looks at you one rainy evening and whispers your name like a prayer.